Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Farron Franzak, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Farron and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. We've been having this conversation about the events that have been taking place basically on the ground. You have the Donbass region that is basically surrounded at this point. I believe one of the major cities has fallen. The other major cities are basically being surrounded. Lavrov seems to be in a pretty decent position, basically saying that this is proceeding along with plans or along with our plans, and he seems extremely resolute. Zelensky seems unshaven and kind of all over the place. And the last conversation he had with the West, there was multiple reporting, New York Times in addition to Financial Times. And so the Russian position seems to be resolute, and they seem to be in a situation of using, let's say, military positioning as an extension of negotiation. Again, war is just an extension of politics. To have a conversation about what is taking place on the ground, and not just what is taking place on the ground. I want to directly deal with some of the things that people have been saying about Ukraine in the U.S. media. But, oh, there's no such thing as Nazis in Ukraine. Oh, this was never a situation. Oh, this was a revolution. This wasn't a coup. And I want to deal with this with basically a historian that we have joining us. So joining us is Jareth Copus. He's author of Ukraine Forever a Pawn and Preparing for the Worst, How to Survive a Natural and Man-Made Disaster from Mass Shootings to Tornadoes. Jareth, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on again.
No, absolutely. I appreciate having you. And so negotiations are basically continuing in Belarus. That was basically the latest. Zelensky is saying that he wants to negotiate with Putin in this case. It seems that Russia is open to negotiating, providing their demands are met. And those demands are basically a defanged or demilitarized Ukraine, a denazified Ukraine, and basically removing Ukraine as a potential threat to Russia going forward. What has been your take on the events that have been taking place so far? What are your thoughts? Just as a wide open question, give me all the space to answer.
As far as everything that's been going on, it seems as if the operation has been moving ahead successfully. I think what's really important to understand is that Russia's only using about 10% of its amassed forces. Mm-hmm. So they're really tiptoeing into this, and it's obvious as to why. They're doing it to prevent loss of life. They knew going into this that this was going to be a PR war as much as it was a military war. So if they came in guns blazing, which they could have done in an American-style kind of blitzkrieg, they could have come in and taken the entire country already. But they came in tiptoeing, making sure they weren't going to kill they see these people as their family, as their brothers, so they didn't want to come in and have civilians dying en masse. And they came in. They have been executing everything as planned according to the operation, and it seems like it's been quite successful thus far.
It seems that they're trying to smash the Ukrainian military. Like, that seems to be the focus, not necessarily civilians.
The airstrikes have been very pinned. The specific targets have been military and operational type outposts. It hasn't been any sort of civilian location whatsoever.
From your standpoint, what do you think this goes currently? I mean, do you think there's any potential for negotiation in this situation?
There was 8 years of attempted negotiation, and it went nowhere. Zelensky's just a hostage at this point, so I don't see anything changing. All the U.S. wants to do is keep this prolonged as long as possible and have as much death and terror as possible. And Zelensky will continue to uphold that for the U.S. since his life is pretty much in their hands.
You know, it was interesting, too, because I was talking to George Galloway about this last Sunday, because he asked me, he was like, do you think if Zelensky went to the peace talk table and they had made out this perfect deal, that he would take it? And I said, I was like, honestly, I don't think so, because, like you said, he's very much a puppet now for the United States. However, when you have this overwhelming, fever pitch coming between, you have Russian people protesting this war because they don't want it. You have Ukrainians who are protesting because they just had to get out of their homes. Do you think that maybe the pressure mounting might actually get him to go to the table, or do you think he's going to ride it out?
I think Zelensky will ride it out. And as far as the pressure in Russia, Putin has a 70% approval rating for
Yeah, it went
the
up.
operation. I don't think there's a large group of people. There's always going to be small groups who oppose things in any country. And the fact that Russia has had that only shows that there's openness and allowance for this type of thing. But the approval rating of Putin has gone up since this operation. And I don't see the Russian people standing against this. They've been against the war for 8 years, and they want it to come to an end. And this is seeming to be the way it will end.
I'm curious, from your standpoint, what does it mean mechanically for Zelensky to not be willing to negotiate and take it to the end like that?
It doesn't benefit him. It doesn't benefit his country. So I think that only shows further that he's under the control of someone else. I mean, if he were a sane man, he would have done his promises from the very start. He ran on the fact that he wanted to bring peace to the Donbass.
Right.
And that's why he was elected. He was elected because he was a peace president.
Why didn't he? Russia seems to believe that the United States was intimately involved in preventing, or let's say getting involved, and the U.S. and Europe were involved in preventing the Minsk agreements from being fulfilled. I mean, is there some level of truth to that? Like, why wouldn't he try to make those negotiations? Is it something that's local at home? Meaning, he understands that there's this kind of bifurcation in this country between, let's be honest, very hard right / in some cases, Nazis versus the ethnic Russians in the country, where he doesn't necessarily feel that he has a political clout in order to push through those agreements. And the reason I ask that is because he did say that he wanted to bring peace. That was his mantle. That was the thing that he basically ran on. What are your thoughts?
Right. So before Zelensky, the Ukrainian government had already been completely dated by top officials in the U.S. We control a large faction of their government. And not only that, the right sector of the Ukrainian population, the extremists, also holds great and high places inside the government and as well as the military. So they already have control. Zelensky never had the opportunity. There wasn't going to be any leader that could come in and change things different than the way the West had already wanted it to continue going, which was pressure on Russia and the furtherment of bringing nuclear arms and genocide to the country.
There's a video that came out. Mark Sloboda, shout out to Mark Sloboda. He sent me this. This is right here. This is Yevhen Karas. This video was making rounds yesterday. Leader of Ukraine's neo-Nazi terror gang C-14 speech from Kiev earlier this month. And he basically, for the State Department, has been making this argument, and media has been repeating it. Oh, Russia's claims about denazifying Ukraine is nonsense. This is not true. There are no Nazis in Ukraine. Then they bring up, well, Zelensky is Jewish, so that totally means that there are no Nazis in Ukraine because Zelensky is Jewish. And they would go into this thing about their security concerns and everything else. And they would even go so far as to say NATO is purely a peaceful organization. There's no issue with this. And that Russia, a country that is basically being encircled, as NATO has moved, 13 different nations up to the border at this point, has severe security concerns that they've announced. So right here, this gentleman, Yevhen Karas, leader of Ukraine's neo-NATO group or gang C-14, he says, Ukraine is being armed as pawns of the West because, quote, we have fun killing. Another quote, we have started a war. Another quote, we have the most javelins on the European continent. The European family has already collapsed. The Maidan would have been, quote, a gay pride if not for Nazi influence. I'm not sure if you know anything about this guy. C-14 was started as a youth wing of the Svoboda Party, founded by Ole Tannenbach, pictured here with Biden in 2014. Who's Tannenbach? I mean, these guys are basically extraordinarily far-right people in the context of Ukraine's political structure and military structure, correct?
Right, yeah. So it's S14 because the Cyrillic C is an S. So
thank you.
They're one of the major groups that have come out of this entire thing. Oleg Tannenbach, he's one of the leaders of this kind of far-right movement. You've probably seen him pictured. He's the gentleman who gives the Nazi salute from a podium. That's one of the main pictures a lot of people that's been put around in social media. He also was a close to John McCain. They met multiple times. Handshaking with him is often seen. And he's been a proponent of neo-Nazism his entire life. He's really pushed for the idea that the Ukrainian race is a special race and that they are supposed to bring their purity to the world. I mean, if you want to talk about no Nazis in Ukraine, I think people are confused mostly because they're thinking of German Nazis with stepping sort. They're thinking that this is strictly a Jewish hatred and that type of thing. But the Ukrainians since 1919 have had their own nationalist movement that has had its own specific and disgusting flavor of fascism. So they have had this ideal that the Ukrainian race is the mother race, that they had this specific certain quality that made them special, which is inherent in fascism. And they went about since 1919 spreading this idea. Now, it started with the UVO, which grew into the OUN, which is who the current right sectors of the Ukrainian population are descendants of and admirers of, and that includes people like Stefan Bandera, you may have known about.
Yes.
The sadist and Nazi corroborator during World War II.
Who got the hero of Ukraine by Yushchenko, as Yushchenko was on his last day in office.
That's correct. And Yanukovych, the next democratically elected president who was removed during the coup, was going to take that away from him.
It took 4 months.
Yeah.
It took 4 months for him to do it.
One of the things that I think that a lot of Americans, because I just, happen to see on Twitter right now that John McCain is trending. And I think that a lot of people don't remember that John McCain, Lindsey Graham, a lot of these people had a hand in this back in 2014. Oh, yeah. And, just kind of from your standpoint, what other Americans do we know, or do we know that we don't know, were involved in a lot of this to where kind of we are today?
So a large extent of it were people from Obama's State Department. That included Victoria Nuland, Jeffrey Pyatt, and a lot of underlings. They knew they had to keep it quiet, obviously, since this was a clandestine mission, obviously. But it came out of that neocon camp that kind of really stemmed from the Clintons. If you look at Hillary Clinton's Civil Societies 2.0, that's the basis for a lot of the color revolution, and that's the type of people who were the ones who instilled this and brought this to Ukraine. The major political figures, Christopher Murphy, he was a young, I believe, Democratic senator at the time, and he was brought on with McCain to give that kind of bipartisan feel that Republicans and Democrats were supporting this, the Maidan Revolution, and he continues to, Christopher Murphy, he continues to bring that to his people as well. I believe he's in North Carolina. So it was really supposed to be a bipartisan thing that we were presenting to give everybody on each side who caught a glimpse of it in the news the feeling that it was okay for this to be happening, when in obvious reality it was a takeover of a country that led to murder and war.
Right.
And it's so interesting because a lot of people didn't know this back in the day, because I don't know if you heard the news. We were talking about it earlier that RT America officially we shut down. But John McCain was the one who had us register as foreign agents.
Really?
It was all him. The man of, free speech and First Amendment. Yeah, we had to.
And it is on the cover hugging arm in arm with the Azov Battalion. I believe it was Washington Post. Wow.
R.I.P. John McCain.
Yeah.
But, the other question, too, is that why Ukraine? That's one of the big questions for Americans. It's like, what about Ukraine? Like, why do we care? Why did we start a coup in 2014? Why do we do all of this then? And why is it? Is it because Ukraine has a great, these natural resources? Is it because it's close to Russia? Is it because there's a lot of different stuff, going on where it's a weak country that we can start a coup like what we do with many other countries? What is it about Ukraine?
Sure. There's a number of reasons. I'd say first and foremost, we had a foot in the door. We've been working with these nationalist parties in Ukraine since World War II. We were taking them and bringing them to our country We were letting them join in our power structures and gain control in our country as well as Canada, which they now hold a great deal of power in both Canada and the U.S. This is obvious because of Chrystia Freeland. She has a family that's been with the Nazi Ukrainian diaspora. They are fully part of this. Her grandfather was a Nazi and willingly and happily doing so. In North America, I mean, even Biden himself has been connected with this Ukrainian diaspora since the 1980s when he was pushing for Radio Free Europe to be given more power, and that was at the behest of the Ukrainian diaspora who had come to him. The first people he had met then, he now has installed as people who are in power in Ukraine. There are people like Bohdan Vitvitsky, who now hold a great deal of power through the U.S. government in the actual Ukrainian government. He's a legal prosecutor and head of NABU, which is an organization that really controls much of the judicial and law system in Ukraine right now. So we've had that historical control and partnership with these bad actors in Ukraine. Now, why Ukraine itself? I tell a lot of people, just take out a map and look at where Ukraine is. It's clear to see the importance of it just geostrategically. As far as natural resources, the greatest natural resource, if you ask me, out of Ukraine are its people and its soil. It has beautiful soil for growth, for growing things. It has black earth. The Nazis actually were stealing soil. Mm-hmm. They had taken Ukraine. They were taking it on trains back to Germany because it's such good, fertile soil. But that's not enough for what has been happening now. The clear reason we want to take over Ukraine and to hold a seat of power is to get nuclear arms into Ukraine and threaten Russia further.
Basically trying to get an overwhelming dominant military position through encirclement.
Exactly.
Which, on some level, I mean, I always say good and bad are really difficult lenses to look at geopolitics because oftentimes it's about action and consequence. What does person A want? What does person B want? And for that matter, even action and consequence in regards to trying to mitigate things that other people or other groups are doing. And this is kind of one of those situations. I mean, I get the feel, not just the feel. I mean, even CIA Director Burns noted, going all the way back to like 2008, that Russia has this issue with their borders where they're concerned about being encircled, using Ukraine kind of as this attack point in order to undermine the country itself. And our media basically ignores that. I'm curious, from your standpoint, as a historian and as the person who basically wrote the book on Ukraine, when you're watching all of this, what are you thinking? Like, it feels like, look, for myself, it feels like you're in a twilight zone. It's like there's a real historical context, and then the media is doing something else. We're reporting the news, they're doing something else. So how do you, grasp, or how do you, place or frame in your mind the events that are taking place while also encountering a media story that is so warped and is so off to lunch and is just kind of wartime propaganda at this point? And look, if you disagree with any of that, definitely say so, but I just want to get your take on it.
No, I agree, and the best I can do is try and look at because I turn on the news and I'm looking at the reports they're giving, and it's complete fallacies on probably a 90% level of what they're reporting.
It's astonishing.
I could easily get very enraged, which doesn't help anybody, but the best I can do is look at it at an academic level and look at what they're doing, learn their tactics, learn the way that they utilize their language, even their body language when they're doing it, and kind of study the propaganda itself and come up with ways to counter it then. That's the best that a person can do who knows about the situation, is to do that so we can begin to turn the tide on this information war, because the information war is definitely being won by the West.
As we talk about Ukraine, there's the hashtag that's trending is a no-fly zone over Ukraine.
Wow. Yeah.
And I don't think Americans understand the ferocity of what could happen with that.
Gravity?
The gravity, everything. If they were to put this in place, Jareth, what do you think would happen, and how long could you then see it going on from that point?
I honestly don't think they will. there is no way that the U.S. or any NATO partner is going to stand up for Ukraine at this point. It would mean
Wow.
going into a war with Russia. That's plain and simple. Putin has made it very clear that any country that comes in or does anything of any sort is going to have hell brought upon them. He will do it. I mean, if you look, he's been standing behind his word thus far. So as long as Putin maintains control, which I don't see it slipping away, I see him gaining further population, I don't think there's going to be a major threat from NATO because they don't have the power to do anything at this point.
Mm-hmm.
How would you rate Biden's behavior on all of this?
I don't think Biden's done a fantastic job. I'll say it in the nicest way. I think he was the viceroy of the takeover of Ukraine. So when you give the keys of the jail to the prisoners, this type of thing is going to happen. It's going to be a ridiculous show of astronomical proportions. The level of lies and deceit is just disgusting at this point.
Are you concerned about escalation?
Not like I said, I don't think so.
Well, not necessarily a no-fly zone, but when you have stuff where, like, for example, Poland will come on and say, initially, we're gonna give airplanes, and then there's a reporting and our airfields, which was immediately walked back very quickly because, of course, at the point if Poland is giving up its airfields, then Poland is basically eligible target at that point since they're basically using their fields in order to attack Russia in this case. You have all of these countries basically saying we're giving all of these weapons, munitions, and not troops, but they're allowing various mercenaries to basically go into the country to fight. Meaning, in the context that's being created where Russia's the black hat, the U.S. and NATO are just entirely the white hats, blisteringly white hats in this very specific situation. Then the media or the press or the public has this notion that we need to defend Ukraine. And it creates a political pressure on the various political leaders to do something because that is the context that the political leaders have basically created. And so if they are getting massive amounts of pressure and they're like inching their way towards further and further action. I mean, look, the First World War, Austro-Hungarian Empire going after Serbia, that was supposed to be a regional conflict. There was no thought that it was ever going to expand to the degree that it expanded. And so I guess I'm very nervous having all of these NATO nations with a very specific line. And with that very specific line, basically applying pressure, all sorts of words, put money, weapons. And let's be very clear, a lot of that is for public consumption. You tell me. I mean, there's no way that the billions of dollars that they're putting out is going to do anything in the 2-3 days that it may take to basically overrun the country. But what are your thoughts?
So as far as my fears for it, okay, I don't think NATO really has any sort of push to really make things by themselves further conflict where they would be drawn into it. I don't think they're going to take any steps towards them actually coming into it. They understand that even their weapons that they're sending are going to be intercepted. Russia has air superiority over the entire country. They have satellite imagery of every road in, every road out, every forest path. They know where weapons are coming in, where people are leaving, where people are coming in. If they send weapons, those weapons, as the Polish weapons that were just sent in not long ago, the entire convoy was destroyed before it got anywhere near any sort of contact.
Wow.
They won't be able to make this war further because of that. Now, as far as these 16,000 mercenaries from other countries come in that Zelensky was supporting and all too happy to give visa-free travel to, yes, that is troubling because the only thing I can see is the right, the extremists, and these people that are now coming in, because you have to understand there's no military control in Ukraine right now. They're literally holding up Zelensky like he's this hero and this military genius. Right now, it's pockets of military control, each with their own region, with their own hetman, with their own kind of tribal leader doing what they please right now. So the worst that could happen is these types of neo-Nazi groups staging large attacks on civilians, trying to blame it on Russians. I'm just looking at things as the worst thing that can happen is further civilian
casualties.
And that would be at the hands of the neo-Nazi battalions, as it already has been.
And by the way, that would never be reported in the West.
Oh, God, no, because it's already been happening. So if you haven't heard about it, it's very clear it's not going to be reported. In Mariupol, which is the stronghold of the neo-Nazi groups, Russia has encircled the city and provided a free humanitarian passage route for any of the people in the city. But the neo-Nazis that hold power in Mariupol aren't allowing people to leave. They need the human shields. I've seen multiple reports, watched multiple videos of people trying to flee the city of Mariupol and being shot dead by these neo-Nazi battalions in their vehicles. Women, children, men, you name it, everybody. They won't let them leave. They need them as human shields, and that's what's going to happen. This humanitarian-style crisis is the biggest point of contention for Russia to have to deal with, but that's why they started this operation anyways, so they're prepared for it.
I'm curious, what does it mean from your standpoint, denazification of Ukraine? That was one of the statements that raised eyebrows in the United States or in the West when Putin basically said it, we're going to denazify. Now, anybody that knows anything about the country looked at that and says, oh, okay, fair enough. Yes, there are Nazis there, that's clear. The West didn't think of it that way. They were like, whoa, he's just making this up. What does it mean? Right. What does Putin mean in the sense of denazification? What does that look like in practice? Is that basically you see a Nazi, you kill a Nazi? Or is it something more, I don't know, elegant than that? What are your thoughts?
Because I don't think it's see a Nazi, kill a Nazi, because you're not going to win the people's hearts by doing that. And in Ukraine, they've had this fascist ideology that they've lived with. Even if they haven't supported it, it's been a part of their culture because it was done at such a level that it's been ingrained in their culture now for years. So they don't have to support it, but it's there, and they understand that it's there. A large amount of the population wants to shed that. So the way to do that is by getting them to realize that these people don't hold the power anymore. Because of the power that these groups have held, they've been able to maintain that kind of overbearance over the large population. This is a minority group that feels the way they do this. This Nazi ideology is a minority group. But because they've had this historical context and now the power, they're able to continue that as if it's the majority, and it's not. The best way to uproot that is to win the hearts of the people of Ukraine. And I think Putin understands that more than anybody. That if you look at the denazification after World War II, it's all been about winning the hearts of the people back. You can't go in and kill everybody and expect the country to be your...
Okay with that, right. And maybe that's part of the other reason that he is limiting this kind of campaign. He wants negotiation after the fact. I mean, the goal is maybe not necessarily to collapse the government. 30 seconds, Jareth. From your standpoint, oh man, the question literally just dropped out of my head as I was going to ask the question.
Well,
go for it.
Okay, I was going to say, if you need one, you say win back the hearts of the Ukrainian people. Where we're at now, do you think he's going to? Because it seems like a lot of them are not on board anymore.
And real quick, is this liberation of Ukraine?
I do believe this is liberation. I don't see it as anything else. As far as the people of Ukraine, you get the view from the West. Obviously, a lot of people are very upset about war being brought to their country, but wait until after it's all settled, as things are rebuilt by the Russian government.
And then evaluate it from there.
Things are brought back.
Jareth, we're going to have to end it. I really appreciate it. Thank you for this. This was a great conversation, and
Thanks,
you gave
Jareth.
Astonishingly good information on the issue that's taking place. Jareth Copus is author of Ukraine Forever Upon, Preparing for the Worst, How to Survive Natural and Man-Made Disasters from Mass Shootings to Tornadoes. You can follow him on Twitter at Rodion Press and find his books on RodionPress.com. Fault Lines, Thomas, Bronzak. Back in a moment.